You're listening to a production of the National Media Archive. To learn more or volunteer, go to nationalmediaarchive.com. Silicon came to the valley when engineers and dreamers decided that fruit trees would have to make way for circuits that could carry thought like tiny rivers of light. At the edge of this new promise, men like William Shockley tinkered with brittle bits of silicon and brought the transistor to life. When Shockley found his footing, others stepped off his shoulders and built companies whose names would soon glow from glass towers and ordinary garages alike. Names like Fairchild and Intel and National Semiconductor. These were the seeds that would sprout a jungle of wires and chips and the strange new dreams that hovered above it all like ghostly code. And then came the ones who wanted to play. Among all the serious men in lab coats, there was one tall boy from Utah who could not stop thinking about amusement. Nolan Bushnell grew up where the salt air eats at everything it touches and where the people believed in hard work and clean living. But Nolan's mind was too restless to sit still in a pew or behind a plain desk. He liked to fiddle with radios and gadgets. He liked to dream about ways a simple machine could surprise people, make them smile, steal a coin from their pocket for a few minutes of delight. He was a tall teenager who once tied a light to a kite and made the neighbors believe that visitors had come down from the stars. When Nolan finally found himself in California, he was working for a company that cared about tape and images and the flicker of screens. He spent his days designing for Ampex, but at night, his mind kept slipping back to an old thought. What if people could drop a coin into a box and make a computer dance for them? What if a television screen was not only for news or sitcoms or the steady hum of late-night commercials, but for something more mischievous, more alive? At night, when his children were sleeping and the house was quiet, Nolan turned one bedroom into a nest of tangled wires and humming circuits. His daughter's bed was shoved aside to make space for the birth of a game that could fit into a wooden cabinet but felt as big as the whole sky when its spaceship blinked and darted across the screen. He called it computer space. It was not beautiful, not yet, but it did something no carnival ring toss or pinball machine had done. It whispered back to the player, calculating, reacting, pretending to be an enemy that could think in flickers and blips. The machine itself was crude, built from simple logic chips that knew how to switch on and off like tiny digital fireflies. But in the dark of a bar, when the bright lines swooped across the glass and the player's fingers found the buttons, the old world of coin tricks and carnival barkers felt suddenly dusty. Nolan's first machine did not take over the world. It was too clever, too complicated for the kind of person who just wanted to drop in a quarter and feel like a hero without reading instructions. People did not want to decode the game. They wanted it to speak their language instantly. Nolan saw that now. The next time, he would build something so simple that even a drunk leaning against a sticky bar could figure it out before the bartender shouted last call. So he sketched a new idea on napkins and scrap paper, 2 paddles, 1 ball, a game that borrowed the shape and rules from table tennis but lived entirely inside the warm glow of a screen, a knob to twist left and right, a white square that bounced back and forth, and every time the paddle hit the ball, there would be that hollow, satisfying echo, pong. That was it, pong, a name that did not need explaining. A sound that felt just right in the ear, like a pebble dropped into a deep well. The first pong did not arrive in a sleek showroom. It found its first believers inside a bar where men and women leaned into jukebox lights and spilled beer on cheap carpet. When Nolan and his small crew plugged the cabinet into the wall at Andy Cap's tavern, they did not know if people would care. But they did. They cared so much that within 2 nights the milk jug they used to catch the coins was overflowing, not with a trickle of spare change, but with a stream of quarters that said, "Yes, this is fun. This is worth it. This makes me want to stay here for just one more round." When the bar owner called Nolan's people in a panic, they assumed the machine was broken. When they pried it open, they saw the truth. The only thing wrong was that people loved it too much. The box was choked with coins, stuffed to the hinges, a tiny treasure chest filled by restless hands. This was how Atari was born, from the whir of wires and the echo of a simple, playful idea that the future could be fun, and maybe a little profitable too. Nolan did not call his company Computer Space Incorporated or Bushnell's gaming company. He called it Atari, a word borrowed from an ancient game he loved, a word that meant a moment when one player has cornered the other, a moment when the board is theirs. And for a brief, shining second, the board did belong to Nolan and his band of dreamers. They did not know yet how big it would get, or how heavy success could feel when the fun turned into the grind of managing assembly lines and shipping boxes. But for now, they knew only the thrill of something new blinking to life in a world that had never seen its like before. When the quarters began to pile up so high that even Nolan Bushnell could not ignore them, he understood the valley he stood in was no longer a sleepy orchard of plums and peaches. It had become a place where the hum of circuits could turn a good idea into an empire overnight. Pong was no accident. Pong was proof that ordinary people craved something simple they could hold in their hands, twist, turn, and laugh at with friends. Pong proved that a screen did not need to show a full movie or a news anchor's grin. Sometimes it only needed a dot and a paddle and the chance to beat the person sitting next to you. While Pong conquered bars and arcades with its easy charm, Nolan and the scrappy band around him realized they had stepped into a world ruled not only by ideas, but by the invisible gears of manufacturing. They needed boxes built right, circuit boards that did not short out, solder points that held fast under the heat of constant play. And they needed people, dozens at first, then hundreds, to put all those wires and plastic panels together, one after another, day after day. But Atari was not a company like any other in the valley. The ones who came to solder and hammer and test the beeping machines did not look like the tidy rows of engineers at the big semiconductor firms. They were kids with long hair and patched-up jeans. Some of them smelled like gasoline and freedom. Some of them worked 12 hours straight just to keep up with the orders Nolan was making up on napkins during his restless nights. There were times in those early years when the walls of Atari's rented warehouses shook with music and laughter and the clatter of parts being tested. There were also days when the lights flickered because they had not paid the electric bill on time. There were days when boxes of finished games sat waiting to be shipped, but the money for the truck never showed up until Nolan made another desperate phone call to a local bank that still did not quite understand what kind of company they were lending to. But through it all, the quarters kept pouring in, small metal tokens of trust that said the game was good and the people wanted more. It did not take long for Nolan to see the storm brewing. He knew that others were watching, other sharp minds, other fast hands, other men who looked at a Pong cabinet and thought, I could build that too. And they did. Garages all over the country spat out knockoffs with new paint and new names, but the same thumping sound when the ball hit the digital wall. It was the same shape, the same promise. Drop a coin, play for a moment, forget the rest of your day. And it worked. The imitators did not carry the burden of inventing the thing. They only needed to build it a little cheaper, sell it a little faster, and keep their pockets open for the rush of coins. Atari, the original, could have sunk under the weight of its own genius. But Nolan Bushnell, the kid who once tricked his neighbors with a kite and a light bulb, was not going to lose his lead so easily. He told his engineers to move faster. He told his small crew of thinkers to dream up new variations before the imitators could figure out how to copy them. Pong became doubles pong. Pong became quadra-pong. Pong became a seed that sprouted into games with tanks and spaceships and race cars skidding around corners drawn in simple white lines. The money came in fast, but went out just as quickly. New machines required new factories. New factories needed workers, and workers needed to be paid something, even if it was not much more than what a bartender tipped at the end of a long night. Nolan promised no layoffs and cheap cafeteria food. He promised fun. He promised that the spirit of the place would stay wild and loose, even as the company grew from a handful of dreamers to a small city of soldering irons and paychecks. But for every promise kept, another was broken by the weight of reality. The line workers knew what they were worth. Some stole parts because they could. Some looked the other way when machines went missing out the back door. Others drank on the job to keep the hours from dragging too slowly. Managers came and went. Nolan did not want to be the kind of boss who fired people for being restless and strange. That was what made the place feel alive. But every quarter that went missing was another nail in the thin wall that kept Atari from drowning in its own chaos. Outside the low-slung warehouses, the rest of the valley kept booming. Silicon chips shrank in size and cost, growing more powerful and hungry for new ideas. Across the ocean, in quiet boardrooms, big companies watched what Atari had done and wondered how to pull the same trick in a box that could fit into the living room. They saw the blinking paddles and the bouncing ball, and they knew that people might pay not just for a few minutes in a bar, but for an entire evening on their couch, playing the same simple game with their kids in pajamas. Nolan felt that tug too. He called it home pong, the next move in his private game of check and capture. Take the same easy magic that lit up Andy Cap's tavern and shrink it into a tidy box that could plug into any ordinary television. No quarters, no smoky bars, no bartender yelling closing time. Just a family, a couple of plastic knobs, and the soft static hum of a home television turned into an electronic playground. It was a bet, a huge one. Building home pong meant building parts in bulk, gambling on buyers who might not understand how a video game worked outside a bar or an arcade. But Nolan's gamble was timed just right. One cold morning, the sporting goods buyer from a giant American retailer named Sears knocked on Atari's door and asked how many home pongs Nolan could make. Nolan shrugged and said 75,000, his head spinning at the number. The buyer said double it. Make it 150,000. Sears would take them all and sell them to every family in America that wanted a taste of the future, right in the comfort of their carpeted living rooms. This single handshake turned Atari from a gang of misfits soldering boards in a rented skating rink into a national headline. Money flowed in faster than the solder could cool. Warehouses filled with boxes stacked to the rafters. Trucks pulled up and hauled them away to the same stores where families once shopped for toasters and blankets. Pong came home. And when the holidays hit, Pong flew off the shelves faster than anyone could have guessed. Nolan's bet paid off, and for a moment, all the voices that told him it was too risky, too foolish, too weird, fell quiet under the roar of success. At night, when the factory lights flickered off and the last trucks pulled away, Nolan and his closest circle still gathered in hidden rooms and cheap motels to plan what came next. They brought boxes of cheap wine and paper cups. They scribbled on napkins. They dreamed of machines that could drive, machines that could fly, machines that could talk back. They dreamed of a future where play was not a distraction but a pulse, a heartbeat that could keep a company alive as long as there was always something new to feed the world's hunger for a blinking screen. As the 70s slipped toward the 80s, the little valley that once smelled of blossoms and orchard dust now glowed at night with signs that said Intel, National Semiconductor, Hewlett-Packard. In the middle of that grid of roads and low tilt-up buildings sat Atari, a company that had learned how fast a good idea could slip through your fingers if you did not hold it tight enough. But even Nolan Bushnell, king of Pong, could not hold on forever. When home Pong found its way under so many Christmas trees, Atari felt untouchable. But success has a way of changing a place. The way sweet fruit left too long on the branch turns sour under its own weight. Suddenly, the tiny company of dreamers had managers in suits and consultants with clipboards. They still called their late-night gatherings retreats, where ideas were hatched over beer and drifting smoke, but the ideas had to answer to people with ledgers and budgets now. The valley around Atari was no longer just fertile ground for misfits and tinkerers. It had become a magnet for lawyers, bankers, venture capitalists, all of them eager to find the next chip, the next big thing, the next small company to buy up or break apart. Atari was still flush with cash from the flood of Pong quarters and Sears sales, but the cost of staying on top was growing faster than the piles of coins. Inside Atari's crowded warehouses, new machines rolled off the lines, driving games with steering wheels that spun too loosely, tank games that clanked and beeped as tiny players rolled across pixelated battlefields. For every game that made money, two more drained it away with parts that cost more than they could ever earn back in dusty corner bars. Sometimes whole shipments went out the door missing pieces. Sometimes they never made it out at all because parts vanished, stolen by restless workers tired of soldering the same boards for the same thin wages. Nolan, who once stayed up all night hooking wires together in his daughter's old bedroom, now found himself in boardrooms explaining why money seemed to disappear as fast as it came in. He fought with spreadsheets, wrestled with supply chains, tried to keep the engineers happy while chasing off rumors of union drives among the line workers. Every dollar spent on security cameras or extra locks was a dollar not spent on the next game idea that might pull them out of the spiral. Still, the spirit of play flickered on. The engineers kept dreaming up new worlds in the glow of the cathode ray tubes. They built games that no one had seen before. Games where a blocky yellow mouth chased ghosts through an endless maze. Games where spaceships drifted through asteroid fields. They fed off the same wildness that had driven Nolan to build Pong in the first place. That simple itch to make something surprising with a screen and a handful of wires. But the imitators had grown bigger too. New giants were learning to build games and consoles. Companies that did not start in bars but in glass towers with international supply lines. Atari found itself in a race with competitors who could squeeze costs lower, ship faster, promise retailers more reliable deliveries. Nolan pushed his people to go faster, build more, ship more, keep up. But the magic of the first Pong, the sweet echo of that bouncing ball, could not stretch forever. Some nights, Nolan and his closest circle escaped to the beaches, to the hidden condos where they would soak in hot tubs, trying to remember why they had begun this in the first place. They drank cheap wine and called out game ideas over the sound of the waves. They told each other they could still outwit the big corporations if they just stayed one step ahead. But ideas alone were no longer enough. The old thrill of seeing a coin box jammed full to the hinges felt far away, replaced by accountants asking how to keep the lights on and how to pay for the next shipment of microchips from factories halfway around the world. The valley that had once felt like a place for any wild-eyed kid with a soldering iron was changing too. Orchards vanished for good, replaced by rows of parking lots and fast food signs. Startups that grew too fast fell apart just as quickly. The bright, clanging promise that anyone could strike it rich began to fade under the fluorescent hum of cubicles and corner offices. In the end, Nolan's vision, a box that turned electricity into laughter and competition and a pocket full of coins, became so successful it outgrew him. The company that had begun with one coin jammed inside an overflowing Pong cabinet was sold off in pieces, its name passed around like a party trick that no longer surprised anyone. Nolan Bushnell, the restless kid who once tied a light to a kite to trick his neighbors, walked away. He left behind the blinking screens, the spilled quarters, the faded dreams of keeping the valley weird and wonderful. But if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Somewhere in the hum of old arcades, in the dusty back rooms of bowling alleys, in the soft blue flicker of a screen in someone's basement, there is still that tiny echo. Pong. A simple hollow sound, a reminder that once, for just a moment, a handful of kids with no money and no plan turned a valley of orchards into a playground of electric dreams. They made people laugh and curse and spend their last quarter for just one more chance to bounce that pixel across the screen. And maybe, for Nolan and all the others who followed him into that blinking future, that was enough.